Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Not a very happy episode today, but we'll try our best to make it as positive as possible. I am joined once again by somewhat of a veteran on the channel now, AC, to talk about all things Canada and the World Cup, a very, very short run in the World Cup, but I'm sure there's plenty to talk about. AC, I'm not going to say how you're doing today, but how's your afternoon been following what we saw
Yeah,
in the morning?
not good, not
Not good.
good. Don't ask me how I am for like another 3 weeks till the tournament's over.
That's fair. Until the tournament's
Thanks
over,
for
nobody.
having me.
Of course. I guess we'll start with the Australia game. Where do you even start for the Australia game? Well, going into that fixture, we know all Canada needed was to avoid a loss. A draw would have been good enough. It would have gone down to goal difference, depending on what the Nigeria thing was, in terms of how they were going to finish in the group, first or second. A win would have probably managed that a little bit better. But their one goal going into this Australia game was not to lose. And they go in and lose a bettering of a 4-0 match against the Aussies. There's a big conversation of, I think we need to give props to Australia because they came in and they showed up for the occasion that they needed to show up for. Canada on the other side absolutely missed every bar that they needed to show up for. So, I mean, yeah, I guess what are your main thoughts from what you saw in that Australia game?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the nail there as to why it stings so much, which is that, we didn't even need a win. Like we could have drawn. We just need to play well, defend well, and we didn't do that at all. And so it just feels like a huge opportunity lost. And like we had a good chance of qualifying for the knockout stage. I mean, given the performance, maybe the knockouts wouldn't have gone that well. I think there's some real problems in the team that weren't solved or haven't been solved up to now. And for me, the game kind of reminded me against Japan, which I feel like we all collectively swept under the rug. We were like, we're not going to talk
Yeah,
about that one.
yeah.
Just remind me of kind of, yeah, just, bad errors individually. Almost no one really stood out. I was looking at the stats, like zero yellow cards. A lot of our players were on yellows, and the fact that we didn't even like battle enough or get close enough to them to get a yellow card, I think is kind of an illuminating stat, especially because we love yellow cards and like
Mm.
Chapman was on the field, so like everything was set up for a
For a
yellow
yellow
card, but
card.
it didn't happen. And so yeah, it's hard because you're kind of just going through the stages of grief in a way, which
Yeah.
feels weird to say, but well,
Yeah.
everything's pretty raw. But after work now, a few hours, had some time to think, but it still stings a lot.
Yeah. I think you bring out that Japan game, and it was exactly my thoughts during the game, especially from that defensive line. Like the way or the lack of communication between the players, and I think sloppiness. It was I don't think we're quite familiar with seeing the backline of Canada be so nervous. Like they looked nervous today. And this is a team that has gone through the Olympics. And I know people hate to hear the Olympics, but the Olympics was just so much pressure. And this was a defensive line that kept a clean sheet against the likes of the US, against the likes of Brazil, against Sweden, one of the most frightening attacking threats. They conceded a single goal. So we know that this is a proven defensive line. We know this is a defensive line that can keep clean sheets and has kept clean sheets in recent fixtures despite what's been going on. But if you look back at that Japan game, which you brought up and I think was kind of a mere reflection of what we saw today, um, there was something in common, and it was that there was a labor agreement or there was negotiations going on quite literally before these games. I mean, how much of the timing is it that the Federation consistently wants to bring up the negotiations before games and almost kind of like set the players up for failure, where instead of them having rest days or camp days or training days or whatever it is, days that they're preparing for these games, the Federation has other plans to pull these players and put them on a negotiation table to bargain. I mean, like, how terrible was the timing when you saw that announced on the weekend that the Federation and the national teams have agreed to a short-term labor agreement?
Yeah, I thought the timing was super ironic, like beyond even intentions, which we can't read into their actions, but it does feel like they have kind of accepted negotiating through the media as a tactic as well. The Federation has. I feel like they kind of stayed out of that for the bigger part of the negotiations, which have been like 2 years or like a year and a half or something crazy. And so, regardless of the intentions behind it, like you always want to approach it and in good faith, but you can't really look away from the fact that they again were put in a position to play in a major tournament with no deal in place. Same as the men, same as the CONCACAF tournament before that, the women. Like both sides have been in this position where things are just not right with the federation. It runs so deep, it runs so much past the CBA, just treatment, decades of this. And so you never want to make excuses. And I don't think it was, the majority of it wasn't down to that today. I think they just genuinely did not perform well. And I think the players will tell you that first and foremost. And they're not looking to make excuses. So we probably shouldn't either. But it was just, you do feel the turn, like the year took a turn with She Believes. Like you kind of came into it kind of optimistic. If we had played this tournament last fall, you'd be like, okay, we're looking pretty good. Like we did well this year. Like we're scoring goals from open play. RIP. And so if it had been last fall or winter, maybe like it's a different tournament, but things really took a turn this year, and like not for the better, definitely for the worse. At least it feels that way.
Oh, definitely for the worst. I'll second that 100% because I think last fall we had the Arnold Clark Cup, which we went up against Germany, Spain, and England. And we were scoring open goals. We were able to defend pretty well against some pretty massive European nations who were preparing for their Euros. So I think 2023 was off to a bad start from the second we heard about the funding cuts, and then you're rolled into the She Believes Cup. It was the federation threatening to sue the players, and you then had the injury list, which certainly wasn't supported by the fact that you had camps being cut. Like, I think also focusing on the fact that Canada came in only with 4 games that they had prepared, plus behind the doors game, friendly with England shortly before the tournament started. Majority, and I think I saw a stat somewhere where it was 27, 28 of the 32 World Cup nations had played at least 6 games, including a send-off game. So for Canada, not only did they have, and I'm going to say a shambolic She Believes Cup run, because they did, for various reasons, and I think we need to consider the frustration that they had off the pitch, but also when the April window rolled around, we only had a single game against France, where the majority of the teams were able to play double headers. No send-off game, no home game, no kind of preparation right after April, and it's July, right? So the team, the only kind of like quick piece of preparation they had was against the Lionesses, and it was behind the doors. And I think those behind door games are a little bit different than like your regular friendly, where you're able to rotate in and out, substitutions. It's probably not your regular 45-45. So I think, do you attribute that to a little bit of lack of preparation from the federation not able to strike some of these friendlies, but in general just going in knowing that you had players injured and coming back from an injury list that wasn't supported, and also having to work around that chemistry links, and the players that simply haven't had enough time to work together?
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't heard that stat about the 27 of 32, but I mean, in hindsight, it makes sense. To play devil's advocate a little bit, like the windows were kind of crazy in the lead up after April, because of how the season ran for the Europeans, and like a lot of clubs weren't like releasing players and stuff. So it was kind of crazy, but it does make sense to me that they had played like 2 less games, like especially if you're not counting that England one as well. So
Yeah.
like that makes sense, and it all kind of came together in how it's played out now. And then you mentioned injuries as well, and like Rian Wilkinson brought this up on Footy Prime. I think Desi might have been worth the risk, just for like the leadership and like just the different voice that she brings, and like the positivity. It did feel like they were missing some of that leadership.
Yeah, Desiree Scott massively missed. It was good to know that she stayed before the kickoff took place. Like she was with camp for as long as she could have been. But I think it's good you bring out player selection, because the squad from the get-go kind of had some lingering questions around it. And I think you could play devil's advocate for a lot of these selections. But I think for me, and we'll slightly, touch on Beth Priestman's starting 11s and the selection of players that she would put during the game. But I think it's easy to criticize now after the matter, but having now known what happened and having seen the players that were included perform the way they did, how do you feel about the likes of Clarissa Lersay being cut, or even Alidou in the middle. And I think kind of when we bring up this question, you begin to be slightly concerned about the pool of big names that we're kind of working with. It was a good struggle to for Bev to not know exactly who the 23 players are, but in a general sense, had it been a 26 player roster, do you think there'd been a lot of people competing? Like, I don't know. I kind of want to hear your opinion on this whole squad selection saga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hindsight's always 50-50, so it's definitely easier for us to just sit here and talk about it. Would I have thought that Prince got what, like 8 minutes, or maybe it was over 10, but like not a lot of minutes in one game? You are sitting there thinking like, oof, like maybe not that one, like especially if you're expecting a contributor. I think it put a lot of pressure on Leon, who was coming in out of form, who played the majority of the games, who was kind of like Bev's guy in a way. Like
Mm.
she was glad to get subbed off usually. It put a lot of pressure on Haidema, which like does she always thrive under pressure with Canada? Not always. And so you do look at Deanne and Michelle thinking like, oof, what could have been? Like not even that I think they shouldn't have been selected because it's tough, and like
Mm.
Larissa isn't tested at international level. So what
Sure.
guarantee is that giving you, right? So it's the depth has been growing, but I don't think the depth is quite yet at the level of where you can rely on them. And maybe that's because they didn't get enough shouts in the cycle leading up to it. I
Mm.
thought Bev did give a decent amount of players like a shout within
Uh,
the cycle, maybe not long looks,
mhm.
but player selection, it's a tough one. It's really tough. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, and we chatted quickly about this too, is that we did have on form wingers. I think Chloe Lacasse is still a big question mark as to why she didn't start. And I can, in some ways, rationalize why Bev chose to keep her as an impact player. But I think, and it's against a team like Australia, for example, who you needed to be on the front foot. And I think after the Ireland game where you went on the back foot and 5 minutes into the game, you kind of want to avoid that as much as you can in a fixture like Australia. So I think rationally I would have started Chloe Lacasse because she's just fiery. She brings that energy. She is a burst of energy. And I think even looking at her stats, she adds a boost of energy, not only to just the players around her, but to that entire front line. So I think, even if we had Clarissa Larissa, would she be the one starting or coming on ahead of Prince or Nichelle? Like I don't know, purely because of what we've seen with Lacasse. And I'm glad you say that Larissa wasn't necessarily chosen because she's not internationally tested. Is Chloe Lacasse internationally tested or not yet? Because I think that is a question that I feel like many are, well, why isn't she playing? And in some ways, you can be like, well, Deanne Rose has been playing under Beth Friesman for almost a decade. She's been playing with her since the youth system, similar to like Leon's been playing in the system for over 10 years. Those are players that know how to work with Beth Friesman. Those are players that she's very, very familiar with. And I think Rose, she's seen her develop to from the get-go. And Lacasse is kind of a newer face into the system. And, sure, she's playing great. She was playing great at Benfica. Absolutely, she was coming in form. But it's who do you choose? Those who are familiar with the system or those who are on form? And what are your criteria that you're balancing it off?
Hmm. The Lacasse question, I feel like this got a lot of people fired up on the internet,
Yeah.
as football tends to do. But Chloe Lacasse tested at international level. She has 20 caps, so I would say yes, she has been tested at international level. I think she's been tested at a high level in the Champions League as well, and she's done well there. People will always not bash her, but like speak against her by saying that she was in Portugal.
Mm.
Fair, some of those games were blowouts, etc. But I think she's tested, she's mature. Like she definitely could have shouldered a start in this tournament. Maybe not the last most critical game,
Yeah.
but yeah, she could have started for sure. Like you're not worried about her in that moment. You're always worried about her in a way in terms of the areas that she needs to grow her game. But the next step for her now is making those adjustments at Arsenal, and then no one can ever not start her again, right? So if she goes and kills at Arsenal now, like she's gonna overtake everyone in the winger pool.
It'll be a hard argument to to say, well, yeah, she still doesn't deserve a start. And I think another player that was in the conversation of having a start was Sophie Schmidt, who I think for me has been a player that has had to work very hard to prove to Beth Priestman her starting spot. And I think in some ways she's been quite professional in saying, well, okay, I'll do whatever role you give me. But I think Ireland's first game in the first half, we saw the trio between Grosso, Fleming, and Quinn didn't work. And I think for me, that actually is Canada's best midfield, but I just don't think it was working because of how shaky that backline was and how much the likes of Fleming had to drop. And so your midfield was kind of already disorganized. So that is a lineup that I do like, the three in the middle, but I just don't think it was working because there was concerns that we weren't, or Canada wasn't addressing. And so when those concerns aren't addressed against Ireland in the first half, why do you think Beth Priestman comes out with the same exact backline and the same exact midfield when it was showing problems? And the only way you could solve these problems were with the substitutions.
Yeah, the only way she adjusted her team really was with Sinclair going back up top, which I mean is a whole other conversation. But in regards to Sophie Schmidt, I think a lot of people felt like, what else would she have had to do? If you look at her evolution from being like, honestly, she got screwed in the Olympics, pre-Olympics, but right before they, adjusted the roster size. It would have been nice for this tournament. Nope. But like she wasn't selected, and so you look at her evolution from then, and I think she really took that as a moment and was like, I'm gonna go off and like literally do every single thing that I can to make that 2023 World Cup team, because she knew it wasn't a given. And so you're right, she's working so hard in the Houston Heat. Like let's not forget how fit this woman is. Like she's playing in Texas, right? So she's doing triathlons after season just for fun. And so just the physical part of it is impressive to me. And then she did bring a lot to that second game. Did she bring a lot to the third game? No, because everyone else was playing like shit.
Yeah. In a
As
nutshell,
well.
really. Yeah. No, it's hard to kind of even, I think, and this was a stat that we knew already before, that Canada's never come back from a 2-goal deficit. And I think when we saw Sophie Schmidt come on, everybody was like, right, she's gonna fix the midfield together. But it's like she can only fix so much with how much chaos was already going on, because I don't think the midfield ever calmed down. And I think they were calm in areas they needed to be urgent, and they were absolutely chaotically flustered in areas that they needed to be common. So I think that distribution of energy, for example, or just knowing how to react on the ball was completely caught off. But I think the only player who actually was able to execute that properly was Sophie Schmidt in the second half. But it's a team of 11 and not one. And so speaking more, and you just mentioned Sinclair as the starting number 9. There's obviously been a massive conversation of what was her role this World Cup. She started the first game. She started the last game. She came in as a substitute in the second game. I thought her substitution was good because she was doing runs that we were missing in that first half against Ireland. Like I think this is not the way Sinclair wanted to go. And I think maybe if we're a little bit harsher here, putting feelings aside, what do you assess of her making those 2 starts and the penalty against Nigeria?
Yeah, I think I tweeted out early in the tournament that like how Bev handles Sinclair in this tournament will be like the defining thing of the tournament. And like I stand by that anyway, because I don't think we did figure it out. She played 2 different positions, which is pretty indicating that we hadn't figured it out by the last game. And so part of that is because we hadn't figured out the 9, and that's a whole other story. But yes, Christine Sinclair, ultimately, it's just disappointing for her, I think. I think that is definitely not the way they wanted that to go. I mean, Bev showed a picture of Messi winning the World Cup in his last World Cup to the team. And so that wasn't lift enough. I guess maybe enough isn't fair to say, but like that didn't come through in the end, right? That's not how it went this time. And so that's really disappointing. And there's going to be a lot of conversations about her role. Is she going to retire? We'll see. But I think that's, for both for Sophie and for Sinclair, that's really disappointing. Like I do feel bad for that. And I think the players feel really bad for that. And you saw it, like they were devastated. And it was hard to watch, especially Jessie, Vanessa, like they were very, very visibly upset. Even some photos where they're with the fans after, like, I think they recognize that themselves, that they let her down in a way.
Yeah, I think there was certainly a sense of guilt in the way they were speaking about what had gone in the game. But I think circling back to Sinclair, and this could be a heavy question, what role would have you wanted her to see? Or, had that question been presented to you prior to the World Cup, what kind of minutes did you want to see from Sinclair? What would have Sinclair ideally looked like for you this World Cup?
Honestly, it's tough because Canada's so different from Portland, and in Portland, it's still going so well
Mm.
because she has players in front of her and behind her that it just works. It works in Portland with that in that number 10 position. It didn't work for us. It's I think that's meant to be either Jessie or Julia's position. And it's so because she's there, she's kind of taking up that spot. But you do want her on a field, which, creates this weird pressure. And so because we're not Portland, maybe we should have realized that earlier and changed our mind on how we're going to use it. Her maybe more as a super sub to close out games. But either way you dice it, it's going to be hard for us to come to terms with like what that means. Like the goat moves on, what's her role now? It's going to continue to be a question until she
Yeah.
retires, which is kind of unfortunate because you want her to be able to leave with dignity, but now there's these question marks and this like failure.
Yeah. It is a failure. I don't know how to define failure, but this is a failure to every standard and expectation and anything that this Canadian team resembles. And I think again, this is the last bit of focus I'll do in the midfield, but I'm focusing so heavily on it because I had much higher expectations of what we saw from this midfield. And I think Julia Grosso is not a way, I don't want to put pressure on her, but I did expect a little bit better. Having watched her week in and week out for Juventus, I mean, she was electric. And in some ways, she was given that shine in that Juventus midfield, which again is kind of a similar story of Sinclair. She's given a role where she feels supported at club level, similar with Grosso. And I think maybe Fleming didn't come on in the best form of coming off Chelsea, but I actually thought she had a pretty good 2 games when she did come on.
Mm-hmm.
Same with, I thought I want to give a shout out to Jade Rivera as well, who I thought had a pretty good tournament given the players she had to be marking, the likes of McCabe and Caitlin Ford. Like, that's no easy task. So I think, is it just the Canadian setup that's not supporting how these players come in? Is it a player profile that's, I guess, clashing with Beth Priestman's tactics? Because that wasn't really usually the narrative here. If anything, Bev Priestman's tactics usually actually develop these players, not clash with them.
Yeah, you would think that, it's set up in a way to help the players thrive, but I genuinely think like we weren't in a position just in terms of the game situation because we were losing. Like that is not what we do best. Like we don't do well when we're losing. We gave away the second goal against Australia, which made a really big difference because then you're like, oh shit, goal differential because Nigeria and Ireland did end up tying. And like maybe if it had stayed 1-0 and Sheridan doesn't blunder that because the VAR gods were like, here you go. But then we messed up like literally the next play. And so it's 2-0 by half. And like maybe you just look around the room and like you don't got it that day. And then just the story from the other perspective, which is Australia just had an amazing game. Like they executed their game plan so well. And as soon as they scored, you knew kind of, I don't know,
Where
are
the
we
kid
going to
was
be able
heading.
to, yeah, exactly. So because we were down early, both in the first and the last game, or sorry, in the second and the
Yeah.
third game, like we just but didn't put ourselves in a situation where we could thrive, and then we panicked so much quicker than we thought. We panicked so quick, we bypassed the midfield.
And then you saw these, and I think again, I give it up to the Aussies because they timed their run so well. Like I think Russo, she's always dangerous, and I think she used to get overlooked a lot about in Manchester City. So I'm glad she's made that move now because I don't think she was ever used properly or appropriately, but I think her runs were just so dangerous. And it's like Vanessa Giles and Buchanan usually mark their runners pretty well, or even the fullbacks, Lawrence. They have they have pretty good gauge of the runners that are coming in, but this time it's like you see Mary Fowler make her unorthodox moves, and all of a sudden she's on a one-on-one in the middle with like nobody marking her. She's got 2 or 3 options around her. Behind Giles and against Lawrence, that position was just pockets of air for the Aussies to explore, and they were doing it great. They saw the advantage and they were pressing after and pressing after it, and we panicked and panicked and panicked. So I think, I guess, moving on, I don't know how to say this. Moving on, all eyes need to be on the Olympics qualifier, and it's Jamaica. No easy task whatsoever. And if you're talking about a player who makes runs and timed runs, you're talking about Bunny Shaw. Now, shall she stay fully fit and healthy, no injuries? We are fully expecting her here in Toronto. against Canada to clinch a qualification spot. But until then, there's a few months and weeks to reflect on what happened, or the World Cup and what is next. What is next? How do the players move on from this? And I guess a bigger question of what must the federation do? Because absolutely the federation has to hold some kind of fault on this. In some ways, they have not supported the players how they need to be supported, and they haven't prepared them how they've asked to be prepared. How do you react to that now?
Yeah, moving forward, kind of wrapping this all up and just, I guess, hopefully learning from it, make sure that doesn't happen again. The good thing is, I think this like 95 generation, that's the core of the team now with like Lawrence, Sheridan, etc. Like, those mid 90s players are going to take that into their maybe last World Cup next cycle and like really not want to repeat that. And so that's kind of a longer term view. But sooner than that, we have Jamaica. And so we really got to get our shit together. We got to score against Jamaica. We have to kind of like maybe we could even win both games handily to kind of have a little bit of self-respect when we look in the mirror, right? Yeah. Because I think a lot of people are looking at Jamaica, looking at Canada, being like, are you going to beat them? Are you sure? Because they've been playing kind of well in this tournament, and they know us well from CONCACAF, and so we've really exposed our weaknesses on a world stage now. So how much can we really develop in this short time span before September? We need to really get back to our strengths and just make sure we score some goals. Yeah, and also fans got to rally as well. Like let's not get too down on this now. Like we got to still get behind and like show up to Toronto and make sure we have 30,000 people in the stands, because every other country is doing it with women's soccer. Let's also do it. And then you asked about the federation. This is a really tough one. These guys are so broke, man. Like they are so broke, it's not even funny. Yeah. And so that's tough. Obviously, you want to say to the federation, like, get a good deal done, pay the players, equity, pump money into it. Let's invest. But realistically, they do not have that much left to invest. They invested a lot in the Men's World Cup and in the lead up to that. And the financial statements are out for anyone who's like good at math and wants to explain things to me. Slide in the DMs.
I'll leave Macy's DMs in the bottom.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, they certainly came out saying they are under financial constraints, but as AC said it, they're quite literally broke. It's not even funny. I mean, they were throwing around the bankruptcy word. That's a B word that you do not want to hear. So I think we might have cackled a little bit about it here, but I think deep down there's massive risks here of the program being shut. And I think it's maybe too fresh and too early to talk about that conversation. I think we'll have to wait until the Olympics happen, where I think maybe we could see some negotiations reappear, because yeah, they need to get their shit together, both the players and the federation. But AC,
you know what's going to be interesting though?
Yeah.
Like just seeing how the federation invests before this camp, because are we going to get more games? Remember we're going to shut down after September article from probably TSN. Shout out to Rick. I don't know if it was him or not, but I think I remember hearing that. So like, will they have friendlies beyond September?
Yeah.
Kind of a scary question.
Yeah, what AC is referring to, for anybody who doesn't know, is that there was some sources that surfaced the fact that Canada Soccer is so broke that they cannot afford to run some of these games in the October and November window, meaning that the Jamaica game could possibly be the last 2023 Canada Women's National Team soccer game. It's like I got a hold up even saying that, which is, yeah, massive concerns, big concerns. I think we'll be able to hear about that a little bit more, like you said, approaching to that Jamaica game. But yeah, like how do you even describe that in one word?
Screwed.
Yeah, screwed. Screwed indeed. And I think that kind of in some ways summarizes the World Cup prior to the World Cup, during the World Cup, and after the World Cup. Canada was a little bit screwed in terms of just everything was not in place, and what we saw on the field was not a team that wanted to win. And not to accuse the players that they didn't want to win, but they certainly didn't step it up for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I always want to stay away from being like they didn't want to win, because I think they all do want to win, but
Absolutely.
they just didn't have it in them.
They didn't have it in them. Well, AC, thank you so much for joining me on this not so happy conversation, but one that was necessary. How can all the peeps uh be able to follow up on all the Canadian content, all the Canada coverage? I hope there's going to be a lot of contracts being signed this summer window with a lot of our Canadian players, so I've heard.
Mm.
And they'll be going over to you. So how can they do that?
Yeah, yeah. Anything with like club soccer, I'm on it. So you can find me wsoccer.ca. I'll be starting with like the transfer stuff again, just kind of tracking all the transfers leading up, because you're right, there's a lot more pros now that are signing contracts, and it's all
Mm,
really exciting. Like there are things that we can be optimistic about, and there's a lot more professional players now, and there's a professional league coming. So just follow us at wsoccer.ca, and
you
we'll
got it.
get you covered. Yeah. Finger
Awesome.
guns doesn't work as well on
Yeah.
the podcast.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, AC. I really appreciate it.